Most people aren't in love. They're addicted to the nervous system high of uncertainty, mistaking longing for connection and fantasy for intimacy. If you don't learn the difference between real love and loving someone more in distance than in reality, because your body bonds with pain and calls it love, you'll keep choosing the same love story in a different body. A client once told me, "I'm madly in love with my situationship when we're apart. But when we're together, I'm not even sure I feel those feelings with him." She wasn't in love with him. She was in love with the feeling of being almost loved, of chasing her self-esteem when he late night texted her to come over, and the next day another woman having the AM coffee date she dreamed of. Her body was addicted to anticipation and proving her worth because love was conditional growing up. That's what I call a fantasy connection. Before we break down the 5 fantasy connections, I want to frame what I'm actually teaching you. Most people think they're choosing partners based on compatibility, but you're really choosing based on conditioning. If you grew up with inconsistent love, emotional chaos, or caretaking a parent's feelings, your nervous system learned to bond with the feeling of uncertainty, not the reality of the person in front of you. That's why fantasy feels magnetic, while safety feels unfamiliar. So in this video, I'm going to help you decode that. Why fantasy love feels more powerful than real love. Why distance and longing create stronger chemistry than presence and stability. And how your attachment system recreates the same story with different people. Once you understand these patterns, the question stops being, "Why do I keep attracting the same kind of love?" and becomes, "What is my nervous system trying to resolve?" And that's exactly where lesson 1 begins. Lesson 1, the 5 fantasy connections and why safety kills the fantasy. Most people think they're choosing partners based on compatibility. But if you grew up with inconsistent love, emotional chaos, or caretaking your parents' feelings, your nervous system learned to bond with what is familiar, not what is healthy. That wiring shows up in adulthood as 5 distinct fantasy connections, emotional states that feel like love but are actually reenactments of old wounds. Before I break each one down, I want to show you exactly how this plays out in real life. One of my clients had a crush who lived in another city. Their entire bond lived through distance, through messages, imagination, and the emotional intensity of what could be. When they finally began seeing each other in person, he felt electric. Every date felt heightened, cinematic, almost destiny-like. And then something shifted. He started noticing small incompatibilities. She loved spontaneous travel. He preferred slow predictability. He looked at me in session and said, "I notice I'm trying to find fault with her, anything at all. I'm scared that once I really know her, I'll lose these feelings just like I did with my ex." And that's exactly what happened. Not because she wasn't compatible, not because there wasn't potential, but because the fantasy, the emotional distance, the novelty, the unknown, was a source of his desire. The moment she became real, the chemistry dissolved. He realized he had 2 choices: keep chasing people who stayed just out of reach, or finally do the deeper work to change the attachment system that only felt attraction in uncertainty. That is limerence, the illusion of love that thrives in distance. The 5 fantasy connections. These experiences aren't random. They come from specific trauma-driven states the nervous system confuses for love. Here are the 5. 1. Love addiction. Craving the highs, withdrawals, and emotional roller coaster of unavailability. You chase intensity because calm feels empty. 2. Limerence. Mistaking anxiety for attraction and obsession for intimacy. You fall in love with who they could be, not who they are. This is exactly what happened in the story you just heard. 3, fantasy bond. Creating closeness through roles, routines, or future plans instead of actual vulnerability. It feels like intimacy, but nothing is emotionally exposed. 4, obsessive love. Needing control or constant reassurance to feel safe. Love becomes managing the relationship, not experiencing it. 5, obsessive love disorder, where love transforms into psychological survival. Your sense of self becomes contingent on keeping the connection alive. Each one of these fantasy connections has the same root. Your nervous system chases what is familiar, not what is fulfilling. If chaos was home, peace feels foreign. If love was inconsistent, stability feels suspicious. And if distance was normal, closeness feels like danger. Fantasy feels safer than reality because fantasy can't abandon you. If you've ever said, "Why do I keep attracting the same kind of love?" you're repeating what's unfinished. You don't have to keep marrying your unfinished business. Take the Fantasy Love Masterclass, link below. Discover which of the 5 fantasy connections keeps pulling you in. Decode your attachment. Interrupt the pattern. Choose real love, not recycled trauma. Lesson 2, the origin of fantasy connections. Childhood conditioning and the Pygmalion metaphor. Most people believe they fall into limerence or fantasy love because they choose the wrong partners. But the truth runs deeper. Psychologists call it emotional learning, a quiet, unconscious education every child receives long before they know what love is supposed to feel like. We don't learn love from books or movies. We learn it from our caregivers, from the way they held us, ignored us, soothed us, or overwhelmed us. If your early home was filled with caregivers who were unpredictable, emotionally unavailable, overly enmeshed, controlling, hot and cold, loving one moment, withdrawn the next, your nervous system had to survive that instability. And it survived by doing one thing. It created fantasy bonds long before you ever dated anyone. The child who loved the potential, not the parent. As a child, you didn't attach to who your caregivers actually were. You attached to who you hoped they could be. You bonded to their potential, their rare good moments, their imagined softness, the fantasy of the parent you needed. This early survival skill becomes your adult love pattern. Fantasy feels safer than reality. Distance feels easier than closeness. The unknown feels more exciting than someone who is stable and present. This is the root of limerence, love addiction, obsessive love, fantasy bonds, and all forms of trauma-driven attraction. Your body chases the emotional texture of your childhood, not because it's healthy, but because it's familiar. The Pygmalion metaphor. To understand this pattern even more deeply, we look to a very old story with a very modern truth, the Pygmalion myth. Pygmalion sculpted the perfect woman out of marble and fell in love with his own creation. We do the same thing. Only our sculpture doesn't live in stone, it lives in imagination. We carve texts, intimacy, silence into mystery, distance into desire. We aren't in love with the person. We're in love with the version of ourselves reflected back in the fantasy. The chosen one the admired one, the desired one, the special one. Limerence becomes a mirror, not a relationship, a self-soothing loop where we worship the reflection of who we wish we were, not who the other person actually is. Why chemistry dies when reality appears. This is why chemistry evaporates when someone becomes real. The fantasy self cannot survive reality because real intimacy reveals everything the fantasy was protecting you from: imperfection, uncertainty, disappointment, vulnerability, the risk of being truly seen. And that is the real tragedy of limerence. We don't grieve the loss of the person. We grieve the loss of the idealized self their distance allowed us to imagine. The version of ourselves that finally felt chosen, adored, only in a reality that never fully existed. Lesson 3. The core wound behind all fantasy connections. No matter which of the 5 fantasy types you relate to, they all emerge from the same emotional wound. The fear that real love will cost you something: your safety, your identity, or your worth. So the body searches for partners who allow you to stay in fantasy, never reality. Fantasy love is the perfect emotional compromise. You get intensity without vulnerability, desire without exposure, hope without risk, pain without intimacy. It gives you just enough connection to feel alive, but not enough to feel endangered. When you understand this, everything shifts. You stop blaming yourself for bad choices. You stop calling yourself dramatic, obsessive, or avoidant. You stop thinking these patterns are your identity. You realize fantasy connections are the residue of childhood survival, not evidence that you're broken. Healing begins when you stop shaming the symptom and start understanding the source. If this spoke to you, watch my next video, Why Chemistry Feels Like Love, but is actually your nervous system chasing danger. Click here to watch it now.